Hey, podcast listeners. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Asset Reliability at Work podcast. Today, we will be speaking with Bruce Wesner. Bruce is a managing principal at Lifecycle Engineering, and he has a ton of experience in the field of reliability. And some of the highlights that we'll discuss in today's episode: first, what does a reliability-focused culture actually mean? And then we'll go on to further discuss how an organization knows that it's time for a reliability overhaul. Moving on, we'll talk about the impact to the organization. Does this impact a specific group, such as leadership, or does it affect everybody within the facility? And then we'll discuss how to address those people who are still a little bit hesitant towards this new change initiative. And then we'll end the conversation by Bruce talking about real-world scenarios in which he's helped organizations institute a reliability-focused organization. Now let's get the conversation started with Bruce Wesner and how to establish a reliability-focused organization. First and foremost, thank you so much, Bruce, for taking your time out and joining us in this episode.
Glad to be here.
All right, so let's roll right into this. And let's start by giving a brief history of your work experience, basically how you got where you're at now.
Well, I've been in the manufacturing arena for around 30 years, 20 of which was in the private sector doing work in discrete manufacturing organizations and process-based plants. Metal fabrication was heavy part of that. I actually worked for Huffy Bicycle and also Tier 1 auto suppliers and construction equipment suppliers making metal fabrications for all of their equipment. Since being with Lifecycle, part of my job is interacting with clients, and I spend a lot of time in different plants all over the world seeing different things. So that perspective really helped me have a better understanding of how organizations really need to establish a reliability-focused organization. Many talk it, but they really don't understand what that means.
Well, 30 years of managing engineering experience, I imagine you probably have seen the good, bad, and the ugly. So now I want to kind of get in more detail. So can you explain in your words what reliability-focused culture means exactly?
Well, I think the key to it is really understanding, who owns the assets. So many times we walk into a site, and that's one of the first questions I ask the leadership team. And they'll say, well, maintenance owns the assets, and that's the wrong answer. Operations owns the assets. Operators interact with those pieces of equipment day in and day out. They understand them better than anyone in the facility, and, that's the essential part of really trying to understand, what that reliability-focused culture means and where it needs to start. When I say reliability culture, how an asset's operated, how it started up, how it shut down, and all of the associated housekeeping things, those are part of asset reliability. I'd say second is really understanding that maintenance is there as the specialist. They need to be called in to help assure that the asset's available, to perform its designated purpose, at a designated rate that it was designed for, and assure the operations has that asset available day in and day out to meet the production needs. And I think lastly, the biggest part of it, and I think the maybe most often forgotten piece, is when a new asset is being designed, getting input from the folks that are, one, going to use it and the others that are going to maintain it. And we look at that from a perspective of what we call RAM analysis. So RAM is an acronym. It's really basing it off of the reliability expectation, availability expectation, and maintainability expectation of that asset. So many times organizations go out and they have really smart people designing equipment to go into a process, but they forget about the end users or the people that are going to maintain it. So that RAM analysis really looks at those three attributes and really goes and interacts and engages those people that are going to have to, one, work on that piece of equipment and or maintain that piece of equipment. I've seen time and time again where an asset comes in and it's designed in a way that, one, a maintenance person cannot get in and actually do work on it. And two, if I'm an operator and I really wasn't consulted or asked to engage in giving my input into it, it may not be user-friendly. So, when I look at that reliability thinking, we really have to take those three areas into account.
And Bruce, I think you made a really good point there that I want to reiterate to our audience. When you talk about this reliability-focused culture, it's not so much that the maintenance team are the owners of the assets. They're just the supporting team of specialists who support the operations, and operations are the people who actually own the assets, correct?
Correct.
So moving on, how does an organization know when it's in need of a reliability overhaul?
Well, first, I would come back and say performance metrics tell the story. When we walk into a site, one of the things I want to understand is how does an organization measure whether they're performing well? So we ask some fundamental questions, about what kind of dashboards or key performance indicators, let me say KPIs, are they using in order to be able to measure how well they're performing? And first, if they're not able to produce something like that, that tells us that we need to focus down and really get the organization to understand what the important things are and create some kind of a cadence around establishing expectations around certain performance metrics. High costs. So if we're looking at their financials and really trying to understand what's driving the business and how they're performing, cost usually is one of those ones that's pretty high on a list. You've got financial groups that are looking at the numbers, and really, if you're seeing high costs of maintenance, high costs of overtime, another factor in high costs may be large amounts of downtime. That truly is a cost because you have unproductive labor in the process that is not being utilized. Those are the symptoms that we see. I would say another one could be, large amounts of scrap or, quality issues. Maybe they're getting quality returns from their customers. That could be one. Another one that probably should have been the first one I said was safety issues. So if we're having people that get hurt in the process, one of the biggest ways to keep from having recordable incidents and lost time accidents is to set up a process that has some stability to it. So if I have to go in and reactively do equipment repair or work on that equipment, it puts people at risk. So that is definitely a factor that would come into play as far as how we could tell that there was an overhaul needed. The last couple really would be customer satisfaction. Maybe we're not hitting our customers' delivery expectations or dates. So maybe we're being charged for line downtime, at a customer site where they need our parts to go and be used in their process. And then lastly is just what's the behavior of the organization? Is the organization just visually reactive? So everybody is reacting to the biggest fire of the day, and they have to drop everything they're doing. They're not doing planned work execution. They're having to firefight day in and day out. That's a definite sign where there would be a definite need for reliability overhaul.
And to recap that answer, so organizations might just look at the metrics such as high costs in their maintenance, quality issues, any kind of customer satisfaction issues, or that reactive behavior. But number one being the safety issues.
Correct. Safety always needs to be first and foremost.
So who does this impact within the organization when you're creating a reliability-focused culture? Is it mainly leadership, or does it spread all the way down to the floor team?
Operators own the assets. That's the key thing. But again, having operators understand that ownership starts with them, and that means the operators understanding how they're being measured for performance and living to that day in and day out. Most times we see operators have not been engaged in creating the expectations and the process for their line, so how can they have a high level of ownership in it? So we really look at having operator engagement be a key piece of any type of reliability effort in order to change this culture. Leadership is always a key factor. Leadership, again, if they don't have key performance indicators in place or dashboards that are really being used, we see organizations that have dashboards, but yet you start asking the leadership questions about it and they don't understand, one, where the numbers are coming from, and two, aren't really going out and making it important. So if I'm an operator in a process, and it's not important to my boss, well, how important is it to me? So leadership is a key factor in this, but again, operators or ownership needs to happen from top to bottom in any organization that's trying to instill a reliability-focused culture.
All right, so accountability at all levels is the primary objective, but you're still going to have a few people, more than likely, who are kind of on the fence because this is a pretty sizable change for the organization. So how do you address those folks, or what do you say to them?
Well, there'll always be laggards. What I find is, again, that there's always some that just, are always cautious or not really interested in changing how they do things. In many cases, they've done what they've done for a long time. It's created a culture. It's created behavior. Maybe they don't want to, embrace the change or this reliability culture. So because it's going to be, different for them. We really believe that the key to this is really establishing an organizational change management playbook. And that playbook really starts to peel back the organization and really point out folks that are either on board, on the fence, or resistant to the change. And someone that's resistant may not be a bad thing. It may not be that, they have to go away with this change that's going on, but it may mean that they don't understand. So we have to come up with, again, and utilize our playbook in a way that it creates a better understanding. The change management methodology we use is called ProSci, and ProSci uses an ADKAR methodology. So ADKAR is an acronym. It's creating awareness and desire, giving folks knowledge and ability, and a means to reinforce it. So again, if I have someone who is lagging or not engaged or supporting what's going on, it may be that they don't understand. So we have to create better awareness and work to create desire in them to be part of this and engage. 9 times out of 10, that will happen. Sometimes there are some folks that will not conform, will not adapt, and we need to take action in order to remove those barriers. At the end of the day, I would say that A and D, that awareness and desire, are key things that have to be in place. And I would say, too, on the other side, that you may have some early adopters that could be part of helping create more awareness and desire with their peers. So engaging those early adopters to go out and be able to talk what the change is and moving toward a reliability-focused culture looks like to them. And they've got to really create an understanding of what's in it for them, WIIFM, what's in it for me. If it's going to be important, it's going to help me, then I would want to go after it. So that's why organizational change management, anytime you're doing any kind of technical change, is critical to success.
Now, Bruce, let me ask you, in your experience, what are the most common missing elements that you see when you work with these clients and try to establish this new reliability-focused organization?
I'd start with not really addressing the organizational silos. Organizational silos are, you have engineering playing an engineering silo and maintenance playing in maintenance silo and operations playing an operations silo. What we have to do is break down those silos and create partnerships so that each of those teams are working together in order to establish that reliability-focused organization. And second, I would say, again, I'm kind of echoing here, through this session, the term engagement. But engagement is so essential in having folks be part of the change of moving toward a reliability-focused organization. And having them be engaged will create ownership, and that will make it successful.
Okay, now we're at the point where everyone is on board with the plan, everyone understands their roles. Now, how do you measure success? In other words, what data can the organization gather to determine if it's working?
Well, as we're working with organizations, we will help them create processes that, one, folks are engaged in helping build, and two, have those processes be so clear that it really creates the way that we're going to measure performance. The measurements of the health of those processes are our KPIs, or measuring the key performance indicators of the health of those processes that have been developed. So developing a dashboard that is visible and applied to all areas of the reliability effort are key in order to sustain the efforts themselves. If we don't, again, have leadership engage and really understand and make those KPIs important and really understand that they are truly measuring the health of the process, we won't be successful. Leaders need to go out and ask the right questions and make those KPIs important to folks in the process so that they will, in turn, create behavior and establish a new culture within the organization.
All right, Bruce, one final question for you. Now that we have the basic framework for instituting a reliability-focused organization, let's put this all together in a real-world scenario, if you can. Can you provide a real-world example of an organization whom you've helped transition into a culture that was dedicated to reliability?
Yeah, I would give a couple, and they're two totally different types of environment. The first would be a food environment where we're processing food in a food plant, highly regulated, high expectations on cleanliness, on process control, on living up to, GMP expectations. This plant, when we went in, again, you could tell that it was a very reactive plant just by the behaviors of folks, out in the process. Another definite signal was they had high amounts of employee turnover, and that turnover definitely did not help them at all. But from a reliability perspective, they were trying to address it through their physical assets and really didn't understand the implications of reliability. Started at the beginning of their process with really centerlining all of their assets and getting them aligned to meet performance expectations day in and day out. But in order to do that centerlining, the conversations we had were with the operators. They're the ones that handle it day in and day out. Where we saw cases where the process was being ran way outside of original setup parameters, we just started having some dialogue with the operators to have an understanding of, in order for this to be consistent and go through our packaging process at the back end, we needed to make sure that we were providing the most stable and again, reliable product to that back end of the process. So there it was a case where it was really just sitting down, working with the organization in order to create that expectation. I'd say that the other example that I have is out of a mining industry, and it was having a conversation with a leader of a site, and that leader at this site, the expectation always in a mining environment is around moving large amounts of material. It's tonnage, okay? So it's your measured performance is tons of material moved a day. And the expectation was not being met. So we came in, and the questions first came about, well, the assets are breaking down. Well, when we first started looking at it, we didn't really see that. What we saw was a case where, again, operators didn't take ownership in it, and they didn't understand reliability from their perspective of operator care and operator handover from shift to shift. I made a kind of a wager with the general manager of the site and said, I would imagine that if we would focus on how assets are handed over and focus on one variable, availability of an asset. And we would do that through effective operator care. That's definitely a factor in a reliability-centered organization. And so what we did was work with the operators to create effective operator care rounds and handovers so that their main mission during the course of a week was to assure that that asset was taken care of and handed over to the next shift or the next crew that was coming in. In the old world, what would happen is that they were being measured and incented to perform at a very high level, and all they worried about was their shift. And when the next crew came in to do their 2-week or 4-week turn, they were handed assets that had not been taken care of and were run down. So what we did was kind of change the paradigm with the organization to move them to more thinking about, their goal was to hand the asset, the trucks, the scoops over to the next shift or crew in the best manner possible. And what we saw was, and this was a 90-day study, and during that 90 days, I saw a 25% increase just within a test area. And once the general manager saw that, we rolled it to the rest of the site, and overall they had seen as much as a 40% increase just by focusing on one reliability variable, on how operators take care of it and how they, that asset availability. And that turnover, again, we got to focus on the right KPIs, the right metrics in order to make performance happen, in a process.
I appreciate your insight, Bruce. And for our listeners, I'd like to just really quick recap our conversation and kind of the highlights that we talked about today. So the podcast was how to establish a reliability-focused organization, as you know. And what we covered here was really expressing that operations owns the assets. It's not the maintenance department that does. They only support. Also, so if an organization is thinking about kind of transitioning to this reliability-focused organization, some of those performance metrics to look at right now at their current state is, if they're having high maintenance costs, quality issues, safety issues, they're in a reactive behavior, that's kind of a good indicator as maybe you should shift focus to a reliability-focused organization. And also, ownership of this initiative is at all levels. It's not directly at the leadership. It goes all the way down the chain. So everybody needs to be involved. And for those who are still kind of on the fence about this huge initiative, this huge change for the organization, we have talked about using the ADKAR model to really express the change that's taking place, just to kind of tell people their roles and responsibilities and see how they fit into this equation. And then lastly, some of the missing pieces that kind of hinder success for shifting to this reliability-focused culture is, engagement from all levels, and then the organizational silos that occur. And now, before we end the show, I'd like to thank our guest, Bruce Wesner, for coming on the Asset Reliability at Work podcast to share his expertise. I know that we're going to have you on the show as soon as we can in the near future. Thank you so much, Bruce.
Look forward to it, Derek.
Hey, listeners, one more thing before you go. If you have any feedback for the show, or you have maybe some suggestions for upcoming topics you'd love to hear about, we'd like to hear from you. So there's 2 ways to get in contact with us. The first is on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @LCE_today, so be sure to follow us. And then the other way is to email the show at podcast@lce.com. Once again, thank you for joining the show, and we look forward to more episodes on the Asset Reliability at Work podcast.